Have you ever wondered if a single, ordinary night could change everything? If a simple act of kindness, offered without expectation, could unravel a story far bigger than you ever imagined, pulling you into its currents and altering the course of your quiet life? For Steve, a man whose days were a careful tally of fares and worries, such a night was not a distant thought but an impending reality, waiting for him just around the bend of another late shift. His world, defined by the worn steering wheel of his cab and the unwavering love for his daughter, was about to intersect with a life he could barely comprehend. This is the story of that intersection, of quiet heroism found in unexpected places, and the enduring truth that sometimes the most profound connections are forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. The city lights bled across Steve's rain-slicked windshield, a familiar watercolor of neon and sodium vapor. It was late, the kind of late that settled deep into the bones, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories from the streets his cab traversed. Each fare was a fleeting glimpse into another life, another destination. But tonight, the streets were mostly empty, mirroring the hollowness in his own pockets. He sighed, the sound absorbed by the rhythmic swish of the wipers. Another slow Tuesday. Lily's school trip permission slip was on the fridge. A silent, paper reminder of the $20 he didn't quite have to spare. He'd make it work. He always did. That was the mantra of a single father, a widower who'd learned to patch the holes in their life with resilience and an unending supply of love, even if the financial fabric was wearing thin. His cab, affectionately nicknamed the Wanderer by Lily for its many journeys and occasional sputtering fits, was more than just a vehicle. It was his office, his confidant, sometimes even a temporary shield against the world. The vinyl seats were cracked, bearing the imprint of countless passengers, each one a ghost in the machine. He ran a hand over the dashboard, cool beneath his touch. His wife, Sarah, had loved this city at night. She'd said it was when it showed its true, vulnerable heart. He missed her. The ache was a dull, constant companion, like the low hum of the engine. He glanced at the small, framed photo of Lily tucked into the sun visor, her gap-toothed smile a beacon in his often grey world. For her, he'd drive through 1,000 more rainy nights. He was thinking of calling it a night, the prospect of a warm, if slightly lumpy, armchair and a leftover slice of pizza beckoning, when a figure materialized from the shadows of a bus stop, arm raised tentatively. Most drivers might have hesitated, the hour breeding caution. But Steve saw the slump of the shoulders, the way the figure hugged itself against the damp chill. Trouble, or just someone down on their luck. He pulled over, the hydraulics sighing as the Wanderer settled. The door opened, and a woman slid in, bringing with her a gust of cool, rain-scented air and an almost palpable aura of distress. She was young, maybe early 20s, her clothes expensive but disheveled, her blonde hair clinging to her pale face in damp strands. Her eyes, wide and luminous, were like the sky just before a storm, dark, troubled, and holding a deep, hidden fear. "Where to?" Steve asked, his voice gentle, practiced in soothing frayed nerves. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on her tightly clasped hands. "Away," she whispered, her voice barely audible, husky with unshed tears or exhaustion. "Just away from here?" Steve waited. Away wasn't a destination on any map he knew. "Do you have a specific place in mind, miss?" She shook her head, a small, jerky movement. "No, just drive. Please." He saw a tremor in her hands. She had no luggage, not even a purse that he could see. Just a thin jacket, inadequate for the night's dampness. He put the car in drive. "All right," he said softly. "We'll just drive for a bit then." He kept his eyes on the road, but his awareness was entirely on the silent, tense figure in his back seat. He drove aimlessly for a while, letting the city's nocturnal rhythm lull the silence in the cab. He saw her reflection in the rear-view mirror. She seemed to shrink with every passing mile, her eyes scanning the streets behind them as if expecting pursuit. There was a story there, a heavy one. He decided against the radio. The quiet felt more appropriate, less intrusive. After about 20 minutes of aimless, quiet driving, she spoke, her voice still fragile. Could you just stop somewhere for a little while? Somewhere quiet? Steve nodded. He knew a place, a small, overlooked park by the old cannery district, usually deserted at this hour. He pulled the wanderer onto a gravel patch under the protective canopy of a large oak, its leaves whispering in the light drizzle. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the patter of rain on the roof. "Is this okay?" he asked. She nodded, a small, grateful movement. "Thank you." She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. He watched her for a moment, in the dim glow of a distant streetlight. She looked utterly exhausted, like a bird fallen from a great height. His protective instincts, honed by years of fatherhood, stirred. This was more than just a fare needing a ride. This was someone running from something, or someone. He didn't press her. He understood the need for silence, for a moment to breathe when the world felt like it was closing in. He remembered feeling that way after Sarah died, the desperate need for a quiet corner to just exist without expectation. He let her be, staring out at the rain-streaked landscape, giving her the space she seemed to crave. He wondered about her story, about the fear that shadowed her young face. He felt a quiet empathy, a recognition of pain, even if its source was unknown to him. He was just a cab driver, a small cog in the city's vast machinery, but tonight his cab had become a temporary sanctuary. Sometime later, perhaps an hour, she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, looking disoriented for a moment before focusing on him. A flicker of something akin to trust, or perhaps just relief at not being abandoned, softened her features. I don't have much money," she said, her voice still low, a blush creeping up her neck. I wasn't thinking." Steve offered a small, reassuring smile. "Don't worry about that right now. You looked like you needed a safe place to rest for a bit." He wasn't thinking about the meter, which had been off for the last hour. He was thinking of Lily and how he'd want someone to treat her if she were ever alone and scared. "Thank you," she said again, sincerity warming her tone. "You've been very kind." He just nodded. Kindness was free, one of the few things in his life that was. He didn't see her as anyone significant, just a young woman in distress, another soul seeking refuge in the anonymity of his cab. He had no idea of the storm that was brewing just beyond the quiet sanctuary of the wanderer. They sat in comfortable silence for a few more minutes. Steve figured he should probably suggest a next step, a shelter perhaps, or ask if there was anyone she could call. Before he could formulate the words, his stomach rumbled, a rather undignified interruption to the quiet solemnity. A tiny smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen. "Sounds like someone's hungry." Steve chuckled, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, well, it's been a long night. There's an all-night diner a few blocks from here. Best coffee in the city, and pancakes that can solve most of life's problems. My treat, if you're up for it, get something warm into you." She hesitated for only a moment. "Okay," she said softly. "Pancakes sound good." The diner was a relic of a bygone era, all chrome and faded vinyl, smelling of coffee, bacon, and timeless comfort. It was mostly empty, save for a couple of truckers in a corner booth and the weary-eyed waitress, Dottie, who greeted Steve with a familiar nod. He'd been coming here for years. They slid into a booth, the red vinyl cool against their backs. The woman, he still didn't know her name, seemed to relax a fraction in the warm, bright anonymity of the place. Dottie came over, coffee pot already in hand. The usual, Steve? Dottie asked, her gaze lingering on his companion with polite curiosity. Please, Dottie. And a coffee for the lady? And we'll take a look at those pancake specials. As Dottie poured the coffee, the small television mounted in the corner, usually ignored background noise, flickered with a local news bulletin. We interrupt this program for a breaking news update, a serious voice announced. Steve barely registered it, focused on handing his companion a menu, but then a photograph flashed onto the screen. A professionally taken portrait of a young woman with familiar blonde hair and striking, troubled eyes. His companion froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips, her face paling to a ghostly white. The newscaster continued. Authorities are urgently seeking information on the whereabouts of Clara Harrison, 22, daughter of Senator Charles Harrison, who was reported missing from her family's estate late last night. Miss Harrison was last seen. Steve's gaze darted from the screen to the woman opposite him, then back to the screen. The resemblance was undeniable. The disheveled young woman in his booth, the one who wanted to go away, was the senator's missing daughter. The air in the diner suddenly felt thick, charged with an invisible current. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't just someone down on their luck. This was monumental. Clara, for he knew her name now, slowly lowered her cup, her hand shaking so violently that coffee sloshed over the rim. Her eyes, wide with a fresh wave of terror, met his. The unspoken question hung heavy between them. It's me, she whispered, her voice ragged. Confirmation. The city, the night, his ordinary life. Everything had just tilted on its axis. He was no longer just a cab driver offering a moment of respite. He was sitting opposite a headline, a mystery, a young woman whose disappearance would be shaking the highest echelons of power. Steve stared at Clara, the televised image of her composed, smiling face, a stark contrast to the terrified young woman before him. Senator Harrison. He knew the name, of course. A powerful man, influential, wealthy beyond imagining. And this was his daughter, huddled in a cheap diner booth, running from a life he couldn't begin to fathom. His mind raced. What did this mean? What was he supposed to do? The news report had mentioned a dedicated hotline, urged anyone with information to come forward. That was the sensible thing, the lawful thing. But then he looked at Clara's face, the raw fear in her eyes, the tremor in her hands. She wasn't just a missing person. She was a frightened human being who had, for reasons unknown to him, fled her life. He recalled their brief journey, her desperate plea to go away, her exhaustion, her gratitude for his simple kindness. He had offered sanctuary without knowing who she was, driven by a basic human decency. Did her identity change that? Dottie returned with their orders, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding. The aroma of warm pancakes and syrup, usually a comforting scent, now seemed incongruous. Clara couldn't touch her food, her gaze fixed on the tabletop, as if expecting handcuffs to materialize at any moment. Clara, Steve said softly, after Dottie had moved away. Are you in danger? She looked up, her eyes swimming. I don't know. Maybe. It's complicated. A tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't breathe. Stay where? With your father. She nodded, biting her lip. He's not a bad man, not always. But it's the pressure, the expectations. My whole life is mapped out, every step controlled. Who I see, what I do, what I say. I'm like a prized possession, not a person. Her voice was low, laced with a profound weariness that seemed too heavy for her young shoulders. I had to get out. Just for a little while. To think, to feel like I exist. Steve listened, his initial shock giving way to a deeper empathy. He thought of Lily, of his hopes for her future, that she would be free, happy, able to choose her own path. The gilded cage Clara described sounded suffocating. They'll be looking for me everywhere. Clara continued, her voice barely a whisper. My father, he'll use all his resources. He won't understand why I left. He'll just want me back, under his control. Here was the crux of it. She wasn't asking to disappear forever, not yet. She was asking for a reprieve, a moment to gather herself. And she was asking him, a stranger, a cab driver, because he had shown her a moment's kindness. The unexpected opportunity, as it were, wasn't a job offer or a windfall. It was a choice, a monumental choice. He could call the number on the screen, return her to her gilded cage, and collect whatever reward might be offered, easing his own financial burdens. Or he could help her, truly help her, by offering her the one thing she seemed to desperately need, a little more time, a little more safety. His own life was complicated enough. He had Lily to think about. Getting involved in the affairs of a powerful senator was risky, dangerous even. What if he was accused of kidnapping or harboring a fugitive? His small, fragile world could be shattered. The weight of past failures, of financial insecurity, pressed down on him. He was just Steve, the cab driver, barely keeping his head above water. What could he possibly offer someone like Clara Harrison against the might of her father? He looked at her again. The fear in her eyes was real. The desperation was palpable. And beneath it, he saw a flicker of hope, a fragile plea directed at him. He remembered the way she'd looked when he'd pulled over in the park, the exhaustion giving way to a moment of peace. He had given her that. I don't know what to do, she whispered, looking at him, her gaze imploring. Can you help me, just for a day or two? Somewhere I can be safe, somewhere they won't find me immediately? Steve took a deep breath. The sensible part of his brain screamed at him to refuse, to walk away, to make the call. But then there was that other part, the part that had learned about compassion from Sarah, the part that guided his love for Lily, the part that believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard, or foolish, or downright terrifying. He thought of the permission slip on the fridge. $20. This was so much bigger than $20. This was about a young woman's plea for a breath of freedom. Eat your pancakes, he said, his voice surprisingly steady. They get cold fast. Clara looked up, startled. What? Eat, he repeated, pushing her plate a little closer. Then we'll figure something out. You need your strength. A fragile hope dawned in her eyes, chasing away some of the terror. You mean it? You'll help me? Steve managed a small, wry smile. Looks like I'm already involved, doesn't it? Now, pancakes. Then we make a plan. He picked up his own fork, a sense of trepidation warring with a strange, new resolve. He was in over his head. No doubt about it. But as he looked at Clara, a tiny spark of defiance in her eyes now mixed with the fear, he knew he couldn't just hand her back, not yet. The first rays of dawn were painting the sky in hues of grey and bruised purple as they left the diner. The pancakes had helped, or perhaps it was the fragile thread of a plan Steve had begun to weave. He knew a place. Old Man Hemlock, a reclusive acquaintance from his early days in the city, owned a string of slightly dilapidated, mostly forgotten cabins deep in the woods just outside the city limits. Hemlock owed him a favor, a big one, from a lifetime ago. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot Steve could think of on short notice. He drove carefully, avoiding main roads, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. Clara was quiet beside him, a new kind of tension replacing the earlier panic, the tension of uncertainty, but also a sliver of trust. He felt the weight of that trust like a physical presence. The cabin was exactly as he remembered, rustic, isolated, smelling faintly of pine needles and damp earth. It wasn't much, a single room with a cot, a wood-burning stove, and a rickety table. But it was secluded, miles from anywhere anyone would think to look for Senator Harrison's daughter. Old Man Hemlock, true to his gruff but ultimately decent nature, had grunted his assent over a crackly phone line. Asking no questions Steve wasn't prepared to answer, with vague half-truths about a friend needing to lie low. "It's not the Ritz," Steve said, as he pushed open the creaky door. Clara stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the Spartan interior. "It's perfect," she breathed, a genuine smile finally gracing her lips. "It's safe." He helped her settle in, showing her how to work the stove, where the well water pump was. He left her with the meager supplies he'd managed to buy with the last of his cash: bread, cheese, some canned fruit, a couple of bottles of water. "I'll be back this evening," he promised, "with more supplies and a burner phone. Don't go outside unless you absolutely have to, and don't light the stove unless it's dark." She nodded, her eyes filled with a gratitude that made him feel both 10 feet tall and incredibly small. "Steve," she said, her voice soft, "thank you. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "Just stay safe," he said. "That'll be payment enough." Driving back to the city, the morning light felt harsh, exposing the grime and weariness of the streets. His own exhaustion was a heavy cloak. He had to go home, see Lily, try to act as if this was just another ordinary day. The secret of Clara Harrison's whereabouts was a burning coal in his chest. Lily was already up when he got home, making herself toast. She was 10, but with a self-sufficiency that both proud and pained him. She looked up, her bright, intelligent eyes, so like her mother's, scanning his face. "Rough night, Dad?" she asked, already sensing his weariness. He forced a smile. "Just a long one, sweet pea." He hugged her, breathing in the scent of cinnamon toast and childhood. "How about you? Ready for school?" Later, after Lily had left for the bus, the silence of the small apartment pressed in on him. He knew he should tell her something, not the whole truth, but enough to explain his preoccupation, perhaps his need to be away more than usual. He valued her trust, her understanding. That evening, when he picked Lily up from her after-school program, he broached the subject carefully. "Sweetheart," he began, as they walked home, "I'm helping someone out at the moment, someone who's in a bit of a tough spot." Lily looked up at him, her expression serious. "Are they in trouble, Dad?" "Sort of," he admitted. "They just need a safe place to stay for a little while to figure things out, so I might be a bit distracted or have to pop out unexpectedly. But you're still my #1 priority. Always." Lily squeezed his hand. "It's okay, Dad. You're a good person. Like Mom always said, you have a hero heart." His own heart clenched at the memory of Sarah, at Lily's innocent, unwavering faith in him. A hero heart. He felt more like a tired, scared cab driver playing a dangerous game. But Lily's words were a balm, a quiet affirmation. Over the next few days, a strange new rhythm established itself. Steve would work his shifts, trying to act normal. Every news report about the missing senator's daughter sending a jolt of anxiety through him. Then, under the cover of darkness, he would drive out to the cabin, bringing food, water, news from the outside world, carefully curated, and most importantly, companionship. Clara slowly began to unfurl in the safety of her seclusion. She talked more, not just about the pressures of her life, but about her dreams, simple dreams of anonymity, of studying art, of walking down a street without a security detail. She had a quick wit, a keen observational eye, and a surprising resilience. She sketched in a cheap notebook he'd brought her, her drawings filled with a yearning for freedom. Steve, in turn, found himself sharing pieces of his own life. Stories of Sarah, his pride in Lily, the daily grind of his job, the quiet ache of loneliness he rarely admitted even to himself. He spoke of his late wife's belief in small acts of kindness, how she'd always said they were the threads that held the world together. "She sounds like she was an amazing woman," Clara said one evening, her voice soft as they sat by the crackling wood stove, the only light in the vast darkness. "She was," Steve affirmed, a gentle smile on his face, "the best." In those quiet conversations, a bond formed, unlikely yet undeniable. It wasn't romantic. It was something perhaps deeper, a connection forged in shared vulnerability and mutual respect. He was her lifeline, her protector, and she, in some strange way, was giving him a renewed sense of purpose beyond the daily struggle for survival. He was more than just a cab driver. He was someone capable of making a profound difference in another person's life. He was using his knowledge of the city, his street smarts, his ability to blend in, not just to earn a fare, but to shield someone. He made discreet inquiries amongst his most trusted fellow cabbies, gathering whispers about police movements, about private investigators nosing around. He was careful, methodical, proving his competence in this new, dangerous role. The fragile peace, however, was not destined to last. One afternoon, while Steve was on shift, his burner phone buzzed. It was Clara, her voice tight with panic. "Steve, there's someone here. A car just pulled up the track to the cabin. I saw them through the trees. I'm hidden, but—" Ice flooded Steve's veins. "Stay hidden, Clara. Don't make a sound. I'm on my way." He drove like a man possessed, his mind racing. Who could it be? Had Hemlock talked? Had someone spotted him? He'd been so careful. As he neared the turnoff to the cabins, he saw it, a dark, expensive-looking sedan parked awkwardly, trying to be inconspicuous and failing miserably. Two men in dark suits were scouting the area around Clara's cabin. Private security, he guessed. Or worse. He couldn't just drive in. He parked the Wanderer further down the road, hidden by a copse of trees, and approached on foot, moving silently through the undergrowth, his heart pounding. This was it. The moment his careful charade could crumble. He saw one of the men trying the cabin door. Locked. The other was circling, peering through the grimy windows. Steve knew he had to create a diversion, draw them away. He thought fast. His own cabin, the one Hemlock occasionally let him use for fishing trips, was further into the woods, more dilapidated but still standing. Taking a deep breath, he deliberately snapped a large branch underfoot, some distance away, in the direction of his own cabin. The men froze, their heads snapping up. "What was that?" one of them muttered. "Probably just an animal," the other replied, but he sounded unsure. Steve waited a moment, then dislodged a loose pile of stones, creating a small clatter. He moved quickly, unseen, towards his own cabin. He reached it, slipped inside the rotten door, and then, with a surge of adrenaline, kicked over an old metal bucket he knew was just inside. It landed with a loud, echoing clang. "Over there!" one of the men shouted. "Someone's in that other shack." He heard them crashing through the woods towards his location. This was his chance. He slipped out the back of his cabin, a small, ill-fitting window he knew was loose, and circled back, keeping low. He saw the men reach his cabin, guns now visible in their hands. They were focused on the wrong target. He made it back to Clara's cabin, his heart still hammering. He gave a soft, prearranged knock. The door opened a crack, and Clara's pale face appeared. "It's me," he whispered. "We have to go, now." She didn't question him. Her trust in him was absolute. She grabbed the small bag she had packed with her few belongings. As they slipped away into the deeper woods, heading towards where he'd left the Wanderer, they heard frustrated shouts from the direction of the other cabin. "Clear, nobody here. Must have been a damn raccoon." They didn't stop moving until they reached his cab. Only then did Clara speak, her voice shaky but firm. "They were so close. How did you—" "Just a bit of misdirection," Steve said, trying to sound calmer than he felt. He had faced them down, in his own way. He had protected her. The realization sent a surge of grim satisfaction through him. He wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He could act, he could think on his feet. Clara looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "You were incredible, Steve. You saved me." He just squeezed her arm reassuringly. "We're not out of the woods yet, figuratively speaking." The incident, however, had shifted something. The danger was no longer abstract, it was real, tangible. And Clara, instead of panicking further, seemed to draw strength from his calm decisiveness. Her trust in him, already significant, deepened into something profound. She knew he had risked himself for her without hesitation. Back in the city, Steve had to find a new, temporary hiding place. He thought of Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman whose groceries he often delivered, who lived in a quiet, unassuming apartment building with a rarely used guest room. He'd helped her out many times, never asking for anything in return. It was a long shot, but he called her. To his immense relief, and with a few careful explanations about a niece needing a quiet place to study for a few days, Mrs. Rodriguez agreed, her warm heart overriding any suspicion. The close call had shaken them both. But it also solidified their bond. Clara saw Steve not just as a kind man, but as a resourceful and brave one. His quiet integrity, his unwavering commitment to her safety, spoke volumes. He hadn't buckled under pressure, hadn't tried to sell her out when the danger became real. He had protected her, using his wits and courage. His reputation in her eyes, already high, was now that of a true, if unassuming, guardian. In the quiet sanctuary of Mrs. Rodriguez's spare room, with its scent of lavender and old books, Clara seemed to find a different kind of peace. It was less isolated than the cabin, but the presence of the kind old woman and Steve's regular, reassuring visits offered a sense of normalcy she craved. One evening, Steve brought Lily with him for a brief visit. He'd explained to Lily that Clara was the friend he was helping, and Lily, with her innocent empathy, had drawn Clara a picture, a bright, cheerful sun shining over a little house with a garden. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the drawing. "It's beautiful, Lily," she whispered. "Thank you." She looked at Steve, a wealth of unspoken emotion in her gaze. This small gesture, this connection to his ordinary, loving world, seemed to touch her deeply. Later, after Lily was chattering with Mrs. Rodriguez in the kitchen, Clara pressed a small, intricately carved wooden bird into Steve's hand. "My grandfather gave this to me when I was a little girl," she said softly. "He told me it would always help me find my way. I want you to have it. You've been like that for me." Steve felt his throat tighten. The bird was small, worn smooth with handling, clearly precious. "Clara, I can't take this." "Please," she insisted. "It means a lot to me that you have it. You've shown me what real kindness, real protection looks like, more than anyone in my entire life." He closed his hand around the bird, its delicate form a tangible symbol of the extraordinary journey they were on. He, in turn, showed her the faded photograph of Sarah he always kept in his wallet. "This is Sarah," he said, his voice gentle. "She would have liked you. She always knew how to find the good in people." Clara studied the smiling face in the photo. "She has kind eyes," she observed, "like yours. And Lily's." These exchanges, small yet profound, deepened their connection beyond that of protector and protected. They were two souls who had found an unexpected understanding in the midst of chaos. A few days later, Clara made a decision. "Steve," she said, her voice firm, a new resolve in her eyes. "I can't hide forever. It's not fair to you or to Mrs. Rodriguez or even to myself. I need to face my father." Steve looked at her, seeing the fear still lingering, but also a newfound strength. "Are you sure?" "Yes. But I want to do it on my own terms, not be dragged back. I need to tell him. I need to tell him I'm not a possession. I'm a person. I need him to hear me." She paused, then looked at him directly. "And I'd like you to be there. Not with me in the room, but nearby. Knowing you're there would give me courage." This was it, the culmination of their shared purpose, not just her escape, but her empowered return. "Of course, Clara," he said without hesitation, "whatever you need." They began to plan. Clara would call her father, arrange a meeting. She wouldn't say where she was, only that she was safe and wanted to talk. Steve would drive her. He felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. This was the right path, but it was also the end of their strange, insular world. The night before the planned call, Clara asked him, "Steve, after all this, if you could do anything at all, what would it be?" He thought for a moment, looking out at the city lights from Mrs. Rodriguez's small balcony. "Honestly," he said, "I'd like to take Lily to the ocean. She's never seen it. And maybe start my own little car service. Something small, reliable, where people feel safe. You know? Simple dreams, almost childish in their modesty, yet they felt more attainable now, as if Clara's ordeal had somehow unlocked a dormant sense of possibility within him. Clara smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "I think you'd be very good at that, Steve." She reached out and hesitantly, gently, took his hand. Her touch was light, yet it sent a current of warmth through him. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not quite, but it was a moment of profound human connection, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had been through, everything they had become to each other. The city hummed below them, a witness to their quiet understanding, their shared journey towards an uncertain but hopeful dawn. The call was made. Senator Harrison's voice on the other end of the line, relayed through Clara's burner phone on speaker, was a taut wire of controlled panic and anger, which softened into a choked relief when he heard his daughter's voice, alive and seemingly well. Clara was remarkably composed, her voice steady as she laid out her terms. A private meeting, just the two of them, at a neutral location, she would disclose an hour beforehand. No police, no security, or she wouldn't show. After a tense silence, the senator agreed, his voice rough with emotion. The chosen location was a quiet, unassuming public library in a suburban neighborhood, a place of hushed tones and shared knowledge, a stark contrast to the power and opulence of the Harrison estate. Steve drove Clara there, the wanderer feeling less like a cab and more like a chariot carrying a warrior to her most important battle. He parked across the street, his heart a nervous drum against his ribs. "You ready?" he asked, turning to her. Clara took a deep breath, her knuckles white as she clutched the small wooden bird he had tried to return to her. But she had insisted he keep. "As I'll ever be," she said, managing a shaky smile. "Thank you, Steve, for everything, for giving me the strength to do this." "You found that strength yourself, Clara," he replied softly. "You just needed a quiet place to look for it." She leaned over and, to his surprise, kissed him gently on the cheek, a brief, warm touch. "Wait for me?" "Always," he promised. He watched her walk across the street, a slim, determined figure pushing open the heavy library doors. She disappeared inside. The next hour was one of the longest of Steve's life. He imagined 1,000 scenarios, most of them involving raised voices, tears, her father's power overwhelming her newfound resolve. He clutched the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on the library entrance. Then, the doors opened again. First, Senator Harrison emerged, his face etched with lines Steve hadn't seen in the news photos, lines of worry, of perhaps dawning understanding. He looked older, more human. He stood there for a moment, looking back at the library, then walked slowly to his waiting car, which had pulled up discreetly. He got in, and the car drove away. A few minutes later, Clara came out. She walked slowly, thoughtfully, not with the triumphant stride of a victor, nor the dejected slump of the defeated. She looked changed, calmer. As she reached the cab and slid into the passenger seat, she let out a long, shuddering breath. "Well?" Steve asked, his voice gentle. She turned to him, and there were tears in her eyes, but also a faint, weary smile. "He listened," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For the first time in my life, I think he really listened. He didn't understand, not completely. But he heard me. He apologized." She paused. "He asked me to come home. He said we could talk more, that things could be different." "And what do you want to do?" Steve asked. Clara looked out the window for a long moment. I think I will go home. For now. But on my terms. I told him I need space. I need to make my own choices. I want to go to art school." He didn't say no. A small, hopeful smile played on her lips. "It's a start." This was her milestone. Not a public spectacle, but a quiet, profound shift in the dynamics of her life. She had found her voice, and she had used it. Steve felt an immense wave of pride for her, and a quiet sense of his own role in her journey. In the weeks that followed, life for Steve began to return to a semblance of normality, yet nothing was quite the same. The gnawing anxiety of his financial struggles had eased, subtly. A few days after Clara returned to her family, a discreet envelope had arrived at his apartment. Inside was a substantial sum of money. Far more than any fare, enough to cover Lily's school trip 100 times over, enough to fix the Wanderer's sputtering engine, enough for a down payment on a newer vehicle. There was no note, but he knew. He hesitated, his pride warring with pragmatism. But then he thought of Lily, of the art supplies Clara had talked about wanting, of the simple dignity of not having to count every penny. He accepted it, not as charity, but as something else. A recognition. Clara called him regularly. They talked, not about her escape, but about her art classes, which she had enrolled in, about Lily's progress in school, about the city. Senator Harrison, true to his word, was giving her space, tentatively trying to rebuild their relationship on a new foundation of respect. He even, through Clara, extended a quiet, almost gruff thank you to Steve, acknowledging the cab driver's role in his daughter's safe, albeit unconventional, return. Steve found himself looking at his own life with new eyes. The weariness was still there, but it was overlaid with a sense of quiet accomplishment, a rediscovered belief in his own capacity. He was no longer just getting by. He had faced down danger, offered sanctuary, and helped change the course of someone's life. He felt more. He started seriously looking into setting up that small car service he'd mentioned to Clara. He even designed a simple logo, with a little help from Lily's artistic talents. One sunny Saturday, Steve found himself standing on a beach, the cool spray of the Atlantic on his face, Lily shrieking with delight as she chased the retreating waves. Clara had arranged it, a weekend trip for him and Lily, a thank you she'd insisted was long overdue. It was the first real vacation he'd had in years. Watching Lily, her face alight with pure, unadulterated joy, Steve felt a profound sense of peace. Clara joined them for the second day. She looked different, more relaxed, the haunted look in her eyes replaced by a quiet confidence. She and Lily built an enormous sandcastle, their laughter mingling with the cries of the gulls. Steve watched them, a warmth spreading through his chest. This connection, born of crisis, had blossomed into a genuine friendship. Later, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery hues, Clara walked with Steve along the water's edge. "You know, Steve," she said, her voice soft above the roar of the surf, "you didn't just help me find a safe place, you helped me find myself." "You were always there, Clara," he replied. "Just a little lost." She smiled. "My father wants to invest in a new community arts program. He asked for my input. I told him about your idea for a car service, about how you make people feel safe. He was interested. He said people with integrity are a good investment." Steve stopped, looking at her in surprise. "You told him about that?" "Of course," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Good ideas and good people should be supported." She paused. "It's just an idea, of course. But perhaps a second chance for you too? To build something of your own? A second chance." The words resonated deeply. He had offered one to Clara, and now, in an unexpected turn, one was being offered to him. He looked out at the vast ocean, at Lily still playing happily near the dunes, at Clara standing beside him, her presence a testament to the incredible, unpredictable nature of life. His past still shaped him. The loss of Sarah, the years of struggle, but they no longer solely defined him. He was a man who had shown courage, integrity, and profound kindness. And those qualities, once overlooked, were now being recognized. "Maybe," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Maybe it is." The future was unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, Steve felt a genuine, hopeful excitement about turning its pages. The ripple effects of one late, rainy night, of one simple act of kindness, continued to spread, promising new beginnings, enduring connections, and the quiet, persistent magic of human goodness. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that life would never quite be ordinary again, and that, he realized, was a very good thing. The wooden bird Clara had given him felt warm in his pocket. A small, solid reminder of the extraordinary journey, and the extraordinary strength found in the most unexpected of hearts.